You know, I've always believed, as an elected official, that it's not enough to do the right thing. You have to talk to people about what you're doing and listen to their responses and concerns. And that's the belief that's led me to the City Club so many times over the last 8 years. I make a regular pilgrimage here to discuss the challenges we face, the plans we have to address them, the progress we've made, and to answer your questions. And I have the mugs to prove it. But as you know, this morning is a bit different. In 20 days, the next mayor will be chosen. This election is historic. Not long ago, the idea that 2 African-American women would vie for this spot would be considered impossible. But that doesn't mean that we should be viewed as indistinguishable. We took very different paths to get to this point, and I want to spend some time this morning sharing my path. As I'm sure you know, I'm a teacher by profession. I spent 10 years in the classroom, and I absolutely loved it. Working with young people connects you to the future in a way that few other professions can. Their energy and enthusiasm is contagious. Teaching also provided me with invaluable preparation for public life. For one thing, you won't find a much tougher audience than a group of teenagers. But being a teacher is more than holding your own in the classroom. It's explaining complex subjects to diverse audiences, because each class is unique, and having to determine on your feet if it's resonating. It also requires you to balance the distinct constituencies: students, colleagues, school leadership, parents, community residents. And of course, it's really hard work. Not only the requirements of the classroom, but the above and beyond that's asked so many of everyone working in education. And while I first started working in campaigns when I was 16 years old, I found my real drive and motivation for public service in front of the classroom. Early in my career, I lost a student to gun violence. She was killed in a drive-by shooting. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. In this instance, on her own front porch. It was devastating for me, for everyone in our school. I still remember there was an empty desk in my classroom for the rest of the school year. Every day, it was a painful reminder of the toll that gun violence inflicts on our city. The loss of that young woman got me involved in the fight for gun control, and then to run for office myself. As some of you may remember, I ran for alderman twice as an independent Democrat and lost before I won on my 3rd try by 109 votes. I always say when you're a kid, you're stubborn, and when you're an adult, you're persistent. So clearly, I'm no stranger to tough campaigns. For the last 25 years, I've been a public servant, and I'm proud of that. It also prepared me for this moment, because the challenges our city faces are not simply ideological. It's not enough to stand at a podium and talk about what you want to see happen. You have to come to this job with the capacity and the capability to make your vision a reality. Being mayor isn't one job, it's 2. First, you have to be an ambassador for our city. This means leading the city in new directions. It means coming up with new ideas to tackle persistent challenges. It means listening to and responding to the Fortune 100 CEO who needs space to expand her business, and the entrepreneur trying to navigate the challenges of launching a new startup. It means listening to and responding to the voices of real working families that live in all of our communities. At the same time, the mayor is responsible for actually running city government. Chicago is an enormously large and complex enterprise. Its budget is more than $8.5 billion. That's billion dollars. The city employs 35,000 people. This is not a job for the faint of heart, and it's not an entry-level position. As an alderman on the South Side, I work to rebuild struggling communities. As president, I've worked to bring stability to our healthcare system and justice to our public safety system. I've fought for more affordable housing, fair wages, equitable schools, and accountable police. Over the last 8 years, we've made incredible progress rebuilding faith in Cook County government. The financial foundation of our government is strong. We've demanded a responsible, transparent budgeting process. And as a result, we have overwhelmingly passed 9 budgets, solving for $2.1 billion and cutting $850 million in expenditures. Our county government is smaller and stronger than when I took office 8 years ago. We've reduced our county workforce by 13% while improving the services that we provide to the people of Cook County. Our commitment to fiscal responsibility has given us the credibility necessary to advance a progressive agenda that prioritizes public health and public safety. In these past 8 years, we've succeeded in providing health care coverage to more than 320,000 people who've been living without health insurance. And I'm very grateful that Dr. Jay Shannon is with us today. Thank you, Jay, to you and your team. We've also dramatically scaled back the discriminatory practice of cash bond on people charged with nonviolent offenses. This has provided defendants and their families with relief from the burden of an unfair and unjust system. And it's eased the burden on taxpayers by reducing the jail population by 40%. We've also worked hard on economic development. Before I took office, Cook County had little or no role in promoting the economy of this region. I knew that had to change, because I know how important it is for government to work with the business community. I have a great deal of respect for business leaders who've made Chicago an international hub, and the many corporations who've chosen to base their headquarters here. The next mayor must be ready, willing, and able to effectively engage with our companies and industries, from tourism to technology. I'm grateful to count on the support of Howard Tullman, the founder of 1871, and I appreciate his counsel to meet and engage with some of the leaders in the tech industry. Earlier this week, I toured Matter, a healthcare incubator, and met with tech entrepreneurs of 1871 to discuss the opportunities and initiatives within their growing industry. You may not know this, but much of my career has been devoted to economic growth. As a staff person in Harold Washington's Department of Economic Development, as an alderman in the city of Chicago, and as president of the second largest county in the nation. In the Washington administration, I worked with communities to bring about balanced development. I brought that experience to my job as alderman, where I spent 19 years with community members, businesses, and developers to rebuild my ward. As president, I created the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation, and for the first time ever, brought together the 7 surrounding counties and the city of Chicago to collaborate on regional economic development priorities. I have a track record of working to grow our economy. One of my first actions as president was to create a council of economic advisors in order to bring together business leaders from across sectors to develop a plan for how Cook County could be a better advocate for economic and business development. It's chaired by John Rogers from Ariel Capital, who's with us today, and includes Kevin Willer, formerly of Google in 1871 and currently Chicago Ventures, as one of its members. With the Council of Economic Advisors, we work to support existing businesses and help to create new ones. We executed plans to build on our strength, our regional strength in metal manufacturing, streamline the costly complexity of truck permitting, and help small and medium-sized businesses expand their operations through exports. With my decades of experience in economic development, one of the most important lessons I've learned is that we cannot foster economic growth at the expense of economic equity. We can only have real success as a city, as a region, if we ensure that everyone contributes to and benefits from our economic growth. That's why, as mayor, I would triple our investment in the Chicago Microloan Institute and reform the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund from a rebate to a grant program. Together, these policies will spur growth and the development of small and medium-sized businesses in communities that have been starved for investment far too long. By investing in our small businesses, we'll make a critical investment in the futures of working families who live in overlooked neighborhoods in Chicago. And I believe these investments will reap significant returns for generations to come. We must have a mayor's office that fights to make sure that working families live in a city that works for them. This means we need to work together to make sure that no parent in Chicago has to choose between buying groceries and taking a sick baby to the doctor. It means that no child should have to worry about her present instead of her future. It means that all children should have access to a good education that will put them on the path to future success, whether that means a college education or a trade. It means that everybody in every community should feel that the mayor of Chicago sees them, hears them, and more importantly, works to represent them and their interests. For most families, the top issue is simply making ends meet. That's why I've always advocated for a living wage. In my 19 years as alderman, I sponsored every single living wage ordinance that came before the council. As president, I raised the minimum wage in Cook County. And as a candidate for mayor, I'm committed to a real plan to raise the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2021, 3 years before the state minimum reaches that level. In today's economy, when having both parents in the workforce is an economic necessity for many families, we need affordable, high-quality child care more than ever. I'm joined today by Jamila Wilson. Jamila has been a licensed home child care and early learning provider in Austin for nearly 14 years, and she runs Bright Start Daycare. She understands the struggle that small businesses face in terms of access to resources and lack of stability in the face of under-resourced communities. She also knows firsthand the challenges of facing the child care industry today, ranging from arbitrary income limits on public assistance programs to a workforce shortage caused by low wages. As mayor, I commit to working directly with the child care and early childhood education industry, with providers like Jamila, with advocates, and with parents, to develop a plan that makes Chicago a national leader in more accessible, quality child care. What it comes down to is this: it's easy to call ourselves a world-class city, but Chicago won't actually be a world-class city until everyone who lives here has the opportunity to build safe, prosperous, productive lives for themselves and for their children. I promise to work hard as your mayor, but first I'll take your questions. And as I always say, if there are no questions, remember I'm a teacher, I'll call on the people I know. Which in this crowd is quite a few of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Preckwinkle. 8 mugs, huh? We're going to have 9, so you'll have a baseball team. You may have more. As President Doherty said, we're very grateful for all the time and support that you've given to the City Club. We do have a few questions, and if anybody has a question that they would like to have Toni Preckwinkle ask, just hold it up And there'll be some members of our staff. I see one completely on the other side of the room. We'll pick them up and ask as many of these as we can in the time that we have. Okay. This is from John Wober, who's affiliated with Mobility Innovation. What is your timeline for a potential RFP and goals for creating an equitable minority concessions program at O'Hare Airport?
Clearly, this is somebody I ought to talk to. We're in the midst of a major renovation at O'Hare, and it's an opportunity for us to support our local and minority-owned and women-owned business enterprises in a very substantial way. The biggest part of that renovation, of course, is physical. It's runway changes. But I'd be happy to talk to you about the concession issue. It's something that's been brought to me by the Restaurant Association, and they have concerns about maximizing opportunities for our local restaurateurs. So please see me or my staff after the meeting. Thank you. I'd be glad to work with you.
Shall we maybe just pass those up if you can't squeeze through? Okay. A lot of questions. We even have one from John Rogers. But before we get to John's question, this is from Lori Gren, who's with Thinking. Glenn? Glenn. Sorry, Lori. Okay. GAPA, know you are a supporter. Will you make passage of, is this the?
The Grassroots Alliance Police Accountability Commission Ordinance.
Okay.
The Grassroots Alliance Police Accountability Ordinance. All right. This is the proposal for police accountability and reform that's been put forward by the Black Caucus and the City Council, and the answer is yes, I will work to ensure its passage.
Okay. John, this is your question. Can you tell us about the young talent that you have developed that are now providing leadership in our state?
So I have been a teacher, 10 years in the classroom, nurturing and supporting young people. And I always say that politics is public education. And I've also been a Democratic committeeman since 1992. And it was always my conviction that I needed to support and nurture younger people who were interested in public service, both in my government positions and as a party official. And I remember in 1996, I was approached by a gangly young community organizer who was looking to run for the state senate, whom I knew from his earlier work in 1992 around voter registration. I pledged my support for him against a more established Democrat, and he was elected in 1996. That young man, of course, was Barack Obama. I've also been very supportive of Kwame Raoul, who Alderman Hairston and I, appointed to the state senate when Barack Obama went off to the U.S. Senate. I'm very proud of the fact that he's our Attorney General. I was a strong supporter of my former Chief of Staff, Kim Fox, who's now our State's Attorney, and there are other people in this room, Kim Dubuclet, Josina Morita from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, Kevin Morrison and Brandon Johnson, who I've been pleased to support as county commissioners, all part of the next generation of leaders in the city and the county, and I'm proud of the work that I've been able to do to support their ambition and their public service.
Thank you, President Preckwinkle. Probably the only one you left out that comes to my mind is my former state rep, Christian Mitchell. And you know, every time I get to know either our state senator or state rep, because of your mobility path, there's someone new who comes in. And I haven't figured out who replaced Christian yet, but I'll work on it. Okay. Now, this is from Graham Grady with the Taft Law Group. Is it fair for the current mayor to pass an $850 million bond, sell off the divvy bikes, and possibly pass a $101 million pension bond on the eve of the election of a new mayor?
I have to honestly say that I'm troubled by the fact that a number of very large projects that impact our property tax base and our fiscal stability are being moved forward in advance of the election in April and the new mayor taking office in May. It would seem to be more judicious to give the new mayor an opportunity to evaluate these projects going forward and to work with the new council around supporting or opposing them. But you play the hand you're dealt, and it looks like a number of big projects will move forward in advance of both the election and the installation of the new mayor.
Okay, good. We've got a lot of good questions here. This is from Helene Gale with the Chicago Community Trust. Her question is, what do you see as the role of the philanthropic community could play in your administration, other than giving you grants?
Giving us grants is not a small thing. You know, we have, in the last 8 years, tried to work closely with the philanthropic community and advocates, particularly around criminal justice reform. And I'm very grateful to the Chicago Community Trust and the MacArthur Foundation in particular for the lead roles they've played in trying to address the challenges presented by the violence in so many of our neighborhoods. Our corporate philanthropy and our foundations have kind of led the way in addressing the violence that challenges so many of our communities. They formed the Partnership for Safe and Peaceful Communities, and I've put, what, 30 million plus each year for the last 2 years into those initiatives in the communities that struggle most with the violence. And let me just say, I think the city has been remiss in investing its own resources in those initiatives. After the terrible spike in murders in 2016, the philanthropic community stepped up and in 2017 and 2018 made these tens of millions of dollars of investment. For the first time in this year's budget, there's an Office of Criminal Justice or Violence Prevention, but New York and Los Angeles have had such offices for more than a decade and used those offices as a focus for grant distribution, for working with stakeholders, keeping everyone on the same, rowing in the same direction, and as a public policy locus. And we need to do the same thing here in Chicago. We need to invest public resources in anti-violence, anti-recidivism, and restorative justice initiatives. And frankly, that's what we began to do in the county 5 years ago. The county is responsible for public safety. We're responsible for the courts and the jail. But we weren't doing anything to address the pipeline into our criminal justice system. And so we revived our Justice Advisory Council, and that institution presently has distributed $18 million in grants over the last 5 years. Not as much as we need to do, but it's a start. And the city needs to step up in the same way and address the challenges presented by violence in so many of our neighborhoods. Everyone has the right to feel safe in their home and in their community. That's the first obligation of government. Be sure that people are safe in their homes and their communities. And so the city has to address this with more resources of the kind that the philanthropic community has been distributing for the last 2 years and in partnership with them. So as I said, I'm very grateful, particularly to the Chicago Community Trust and the MacArthur Foundation for their leadership in this arena. We've worked closely with them as county government. We hope to work closely with them as mayor.
Thank you very much, President. This is from John Wells with Hilton Chicago, and he's affiliated with the hotel community. Chicago is having its 5th year of tourism growth. What is your position on Chicago's 17.4% occupancy tax, which is already higher than its biggest convention competitors, Orlando and Las Vegas?
Well, given the fiscal challenges the city faces, I don't think I can say that I would be in favor of reducing taxes. But let me just say, I think that we have to have a level playing field, so we have to look at the B&Bs and Airbnb and the other players in this arena that provide short-term stays for people, and be sure that that the same regulations that are applied to them as are applied to our hotel and motel industry.
Okay, we have a lot of questions, a lot of different areas. This is from Michael Edwards, who's with the Chicago Loop Alliance. Where are you at, Michael? Okay, we're glad to have you. By the way, I see you're not a City Club member. We have almost 2,500 members. $50, Michael, you become a member. We won't do any other testing. His question goes to everybody else who's not a member here as well. Are you supportive of the City of Chicago's Special Service Area Program?
Special service areas, these are geographically defined areas where a portion of the property owners within that region agree to a little bit of increment in their property tax so that they have sequestered resources to meet some of the challenges that their particular geographic area may face. Yes, I'm in favor of this program. I think it's a great idea. We created a couple of special service areas in my ward when I was alderman on our retail strips to provide additional work keeping the streets clean and making sure that the streets were safe. I think it's a great idea.
Okay, this is a question that deals with criminal justice. It's from Howard Eder. Howard, where are you? Back there, okay. He asks, what is your position on first-time arrests for unauthorized gun possessions? And I have another question here. It sort of fits into here. There was a Chicago police officer who was shot while serving an arrest warrant Saturday night, and the alleged shooter had a long list of priors, most of which were dismissed, had been released on an I bond. And the question was, are there too many people coming out on the street, the job that you and Kim Fox and Sheriff Dart have done, when they really should be kept in confinement?
All right, well, let me address the first part of that. The focus of our criminal justice reform efforts has been on those accused of non-violent crimes. You know, there are a lot of people who come into our criminal justice system for low-level drug possession, for shoplifting or prostitution, the things people do to get money for their drugs. And that's frankly been the focus of our efforts to reduce the jail population. And we've done that through bond court reforms, reducing our reliance on cash bonds. You know, cash bonds basically penalize you for being poor, because those who are comfortable pay their bond, go back to work, to their families, to school, whatever. And those who are poor previously spent the time between their arrest and their disposition of their case in our jail, sometimes because they couldn't pay just a couple $100s in bond. So I have to be clear about this. Our focus in criminal justice reform has been around those accused of non-violent crimes and reducing reliance on cash bonds in those instances. Now, gun possession is a tricky issue because in many of our communities, people do not feel safe. And therefore, they carry guns to protect themselves. And you've all heard the story about the young man who had a gun on his way to school because he had to travel through several different gang territories and he was fearful. And he was an honor student at one of our really good high schools. So I think this is a matter that should be taken up by each judge on a case-by-case basis, because clearly somebody who has a long list of priors and is arrested for the first time for gun possession, having been arrested numerous times for other things, is in a different category than that young man, for example, who carried a gun on his way to school because he was fearful for his safety. So I think these are matters that we have to leave in the hands of the judges who hear the individual facts in the case.
Thank you very much. Now, this question's from Mr. Quintel Howard, who's one of the Urban Prep seniors back there. His question is, what have you done and what will you be doing about providing teens with opportunities for summer jobs?
You know, this is an arena where the federal government has really, I started to say betrayed us, and that sounds pretty strong, but it's true. When I was elected alderman in the 1990s, there was a lot of federal money to support summer employment programs for young people. And this is really critical. These are really critical investments. Because if young people are on the street without work, what is it? Idle hands are the devil's workshop. But if they have productive work to do, and they can bring home money to help support their family and do some things for themselves, they're in a much better place. But the federal government has pretty much entirely withdrawn support for this kind of youth programming. And so cities, towns, and villages, our counties, are left to their own resources. And I want to commend Mayor Emanuel because he's made this a priority, raising money to support summer employment programs for young people, and I would continue to do that. I think it's really critical, both for public safety reasons, to give people job experience, young people job experience that helps them move up in the workforce, attached to the workforce. As I said, I think it's disgraceful that the federal government has withdrawn from this arena, and it's really challenged local units of government.
Okay, thank you very much, President. This is from Marie Lynch, who's the CEO with Skills for Chicagoland's Future. Marie, where are you? Okay, right over here.
All right.
With the disparity in unemployment rates across Chicago's neighborhoods, what early plans might you be willing to share to address this disparity?
Well, unfortunately in this country there are always disparities between unemployment rates for the majority community and for the Latinx community and for the African American community. That's historic, and it's persisted through the recovery from the Depression. I have worked closely with the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership, which I know funds your organization, to try to meet the needs of those who are unemployed and underemployed, and to assist employers who are looking for qualified candidates for the jobs that they have open. So I would continue that partnership. Actually, it's a partnership between the city and the county that formed the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership, and try to increase support through corporate and philanthropic support for the partnership. The partnership is a not-for-profit organization that was spun off. It was a combination of the city's Mayor's Office of Workforce Development and the county's President's Office of Employment and Training, and we spun it off as a not-for-profit so that it could better secure corporate and foundation funding, and it's been very successful in that. So I guess I would say that we have to do more with the existing entity that we've got to ramp up resources to support our populations.
Okay, thank you very much. We have two questions here that are very similar. Don Hughes with the Bronner Group and former City Commissioner Susan Malik McKenna. She's now with Contextos. Knowing we can't count on the feds, how do you fund critical infrastructure for climate resilience? And Don want to know about what can the city do about addressing climate change?
Well, this is one of the biggest challenges we face now and going forward. When I came into office, I said we have to do something about our carbon footprint, and Deb Stone, who has been the head of our Department of Sustainability and the Environment, has worked closely with not only us, but in Springfield around legislative initiatives and with community groups around projects like community solar. We have a plan, and we're actually ahead of schedule in reducing our carbon footprint, making our buildings more energy efficient. And that's what government has to do at every level. We have to be leaders in promoting energy efficiency, doing it ourselves, and trying to work with community residents around some of these issues in the same way that we're working with community residents around community solar initiatives now. But this has to be a priority for the administration. There is presently no Department of the Environment in the city of Chicago. That department needs to be resuscitated and reformed. We have to have a locus of activity and energy around sustainability, around the environment, and around climate change. And one of the ways in which you do that, of course, is to have a department that's focused on that. And that's what we need to do.
A lot of questions, huh?
Yeah,
We
all over the place, too.
Absolutely. Well, This is from John Borling, General John Borling. Since the military is the most trusted institution in America, does expanded access to service appeal to the next mayor of Chicago?
Well, I want to give credit to one of my opponents in the first round, Paul Vallis, actually two of them, Paul Vallis and Gary Chico, because when they were responsible for our public schools as superintendent and chair of the CPS board, respectively, one of the things they did was start military academies. And, you know, military service is honorable, and it's a great career path for many of our young people who don't see themselves going straight to college or don't have a trade in mind. The discipline, the training that they receive in the military is invaluable to them. And we now have a number of military academies in our Chicago public schools, and I think that that was a really good idea, for which I commend them, and that we ought to work with those military academies to be sure that our young people have access to the services beyond that high school experience. And I know, frankly, there's one not in my ward, but just adjacent. I think it's in Alderman Pat Dowell's ward. That's an Army facility. Is that right, Pat? Oh, she just left? Okay. But I think it's Bronzeville Military Academy, Bronzeville Military Academy, and that's an Army facility. And I think those programs are great for our young people. And by the way, young women are well represented in them as well as young men.
Thank you. We have three last questions here. Henry Kay from that Urban Prep West campus, you know, where all the people graduate and go to college, he's very concerned. What can you do about the issue of college tuition increasing every year? No references to Felicity Huffman.
You know, I think it's important to acknowledge the things that are outside your purview. And college tuition is one of those things that's outside the purview of the mayor of the city of Chicago. This is a real challenge for us because we've gotten to the point in this country where we think that the fiscal responsibility, the financial responsibility for a person's education is entirely on them. And, you know, the whole society benefits if our population is better educated. When I was coming up, there were National Defense Education Act loans, which I had in school. And if you did something like teaching, or if you went into healthcare, you could have your loans forgiven if you were doing some kind of public service. And that's a great idea. And we need to go back, frankly, to those kind of programs, because our young people often come out with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. It limits the choices they can make about what they do with their lives in terms of working, but it also hampers them financially, sometimes for decades. So I think advocating for national policies that enable this kind of debt forgiveness that we used to have with National Defense Education Act loans is something I would pursue.
You know, we have a lot in common, President Preckwinkle. I was a recipient of an NDEA loan. Also, it allowed me to get through the U of C. Great. Okay, we have two last questions. One is from Paul King. He said, could you talk about the construction at Cook County Hospital and Corrections and the opportunities they provide for black construction firms, minority construction firms, women, veterans, etc.?
We just finished an ambulatory care center just to the south of Stroger Hospital. It was a roughly $110 million project. We not only met our MBE and WB requirements, minority business enterprise, women business enterprise requirements, we exceeded them, and we also had a local hiring requirement that 7.5% of the labor force come within a 3-mile radius of the project. And on that score, we got about 18.5%, almost 19% of the labor hours worked were represented by people who lived in the 3-mile radius. So we had a real impact on those local communities just around the ambulatory care center. And also, we asked the development team, a private development team, very grateful to John Murphy and Dan Walsh, that is rehabbing the old Cook County Hospital as office space and as a long-term and short-term stay hospital. We asked them to meet the county's MBEWB requirements, and they agreed to do so as well. So there are lots of ways as a government official that you can provide opportunity for local businesses, for minority-owned businesses, for women-owned businesses, and you have to look carefully for those opportunities and press our developers to meet those requirements.
Okay, thank you. Final question. 3 weeks from today, you will either be the mayor-elect of Chicago or continue as president of the county board. Based on your exposure to and some of the forums you've attended with your opponent, how would you be able to work with her if she gets that one more vote than you do? And the second question is, if you are elected mayor, how do they pick the next president of the Cook County Board?
You know, first of all, half of the people of the county live in the city of Chicago. So it's in the interest of the president of the county to work with whoever leads the city of Chicago. And secondly, legislation has been pursued in Springfield to lay out the way in which succession might take place at the county level. So that legislation is proceeding, and we hope to secure its passage.
Okay, thank you. Let's give President Preckwinkle a big round of applause.
Our officers.
Jeff Berkowitz, thanks for joining us on the Unauthorized channel. We're going to take a bit of an in-depth look at the run for the mayor of Chicago. I think what they care about are the issues we're talking about. What are you going to do about the schools? What are you going to do about fixing the financial situation of the city? And what are you going to do about the level of crime and ensuring that we have safe neighborhoods? Would I be right on that?
Yes.
The Illinois channel, keeping you connected to your state, your issues, your home.